What's up, guys? Alexander from Strength of Saad here, and if you've ever uttered the words, my metabolism is slow, or heard somebody say it, please don't watch this, because it's going to answer the question. Are you broken? Why does your metabolism slow down? What does that even mean on planet Earth? We hear it so often. What validity does it even have? Is there a basis for even saying it? Well, here's what we know. Let's just go throughout history and understand metabolism for a second. We know Homo sapiens, compared to our ape-like cousins, bonobos, chimpanzees, we hold a lot more fat compared to our ape-like cousins. We're the fattest sapien species, or genus. And so, it's likely that our increase in body fat went hand in hand with our increase in metabolic rate, because we also have one of the highest metabolic rates amongst chimp-like cousins, expending thousands and thousands of calories per day. So we are the fattest because it holds a great fuel reserve against buttressing starvation. This is good. So our metabolism evolved to help us to survive because we require a higher amount of energy compared to our ape-like cousins. So the fat acts as a reserve for when there is famine. So this fast metabolism that we have, meaning the amount of energy we need to intake, the rate of energy expenditure, this predisposes to put on a lot more fat, because you got to ask, why do we have a tendency to get fat? What's up with that? Why are we fatter than, a chimpanzee, which has got like below 10% body fat? So a little bit of a background on metabolism from an evolutionary perspective. Okay, just a very brief kind of summary why that may be the case over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. But what even is metabolism? You see, metabolism is the speed and rate at which your cells expend energy, and it's measured via heat. So when you say metabolism, most people don't even know what it means. Metabolism is a way we measure heat expenditure. That is the way we measure how much energy is expended or is contained even within food. You use certain food processing like bomb calorimetry to measure the amount of heat expended or it takes to raise, and that's how we determine the caloric intake in food, and then we have our own methods in people. So you can use energy expenditure and metabolism interchangeably, because work and energy, two sides of the same coin. So metabolism, just the speed at which our cells are expending energy. Metabolic rate is a measurement of how much work our cells do over a period of time, per minute, for example. So we add up all of this, and then we get your metabolic rate, your metabolism. So why do some people seem to have a faster metabolism? Their rate of cell work is higher than others, because this is really the question. Why, as you get older, my metabolism's slowing down? It's not just a byproduct of aging. In fact, it's a byproduct of decision-making, a byproduct of lifestyle changes that affect the morphological ratio of particularly muscle to fat and total mass. So why? Why is it getting slower? It got slower because you got fatter and lost lean body mass. These are not the only explanations. These are just the predominant, most significant reasons that impact one's metabolism is the total mass of the organism. The more cells an organism has, the higher its metabolism will be. What happens when aging? Well, aging really is just a degeneration over a lifespan. So aging really, you can argue, begins from birth, but really technically the degeneration we see occurring mostly from around 30, 40 years old, particularly bone mass. Sarcopenia occurs a few decades after that at around the 40 to 60 years old range approximately, depending on the individual. And so what happens is lean body mass decreases, and it's accelerated by things like sarcopenia. Well, what's sarcopenia accelerated by? What's loss of muscle mass accelerated by? Lack of weight training or resistance-based training a slowing down over it, or you never began it to begin with. This is a problem, because you need a mechanical stimulus to drive muscle protein synthesis, mechanotransduction, in order to actually create structural myofibril changes to motor units of muscle fibers, to maintain them and to build them. Okay, you need, number one, you need a mechanical stimulus, an adequate mechanical stimulus with enough intensity and enough requisite volume. This is what coaches like me do. We design programs and nutrition and modulate people's health and wellness to get the most out of their performance and health. Cool. So you can use somebody like me, or you can just understand the basics of physiology and understand that if you stop weight training throughout your lifespan, compared to if you did continue it, you will relatively speed up the loss of lean body mass. Lean body mass, not just muscle tissue, but predominantly muscle tissue. So now you're starting to lose muscle mass. You stopped weight training. Number two, you got fatter. You can gain muscle mass and gain fat, obviously, at the same time. It's almost always what happens. But fat mass typically increases throughout lifespan in the average populace because we eat more. Not only do we eat more, well, we eat more high-palatable, calorically dense foods. And we become, while energy expenditure and exercise has such a smaller impact on total daily energy expenditure than we originally thought. Please don't be triggered by this and think exercise isn't useful. It is, but it's way over-dramatized how important it is for actual total daily energy expenditure. We'll talk about that another time. Read Herman Ponce's book, Burn, if you want to know more. Anyway, so we start to see caloric intake go up and lean body mass go down because resistance training goes down. So when you see caloric intake go up, resistance training go down, this is the worst recipe for a slowing down of metabolism. Your metabolism didn't slow down because the metabolism fairies came along and say, you're 45 now. You know what that means? It's time to slow down the train of metabolism. You can have really high metabolism as you age into your 50s and 60s if you have a high requisite amount of lean body mass and you're continually resistance training, so you need to keep on that body mass. Maybe you're continually even accruing more muscle mass into your 40s and 50s. It's possible. People do it. So these are the two biggest predominant factors that are attributed to people slowing down their metabolism. So it is not some magic. It is driven by decisions, lifestyle decisions that we see through pretty decent epidemiological observational studies. That what do people do, and like really big surveys across populations. What do people do as they age? They're more sedentary, they train less, and they eat more. And we see this taper off about until the people gets into their late 60s, 70s, and 80s, where actually the opposite happens. We start to see nutrition intake and caloric intake go down. That's for a number of reasons: decreasing satiety, appetite, ghrelin, etc., etc. But for the predominant lifespan, this is what we see. So you can do something about this. This is good because people then, it insidiously builds up year after year. You can end up gaining half a kilo to a kilo every year. You don't notice till 10 years later, what the hell's going on? I'm fatter. And I can't seem to eat as much as I used to. These two decisions we talked about have driven this decision. So sit on that for a second and realize, okay, I can control this, or most of it. From the most basic first principles perspective, a smaller mammal with less mass requires less energy. Okay, why would a smaller mammal require more energy? Doesn't make sense. It requires less energy for the survival of the organism. It is beneficial to require less energy because then you don't have to hunt and gather this food, which puts a burden and pressure on the survival of the organism. Number two, a larger mammal has comparatively more cells that require higher metabolism, a rate of work and heat expenditure to sustain the organism, the bigger organism. Thus, it will require more energy. This is the difference of why a 70 kilo male and a 100 kilo male require vastly different ratios or amounts of calories. Now, it's not just cells, it's the type of cell. So a muscle cell versus a fat cell, well, muscle cells as we'll learn, are much more metabolically active than fat cells. So if you're 100 kilo, 40% body fat, you will have a lower caloric requirement than a 100 kilo, 10% body fat individual. If all else is the same. And it's pretty significant, this difference. We're talking, 3, 4, 500 plus kilocalories. So higher energy requirements require more food. It's a greater burden on survival because the mammal needs to support more time spent to acquire food. So metabolically, it's not favorable for the organism to be really big, jacked, bodybuilder style, because now you need, like typically hunting and gathering 4,000 to 6,000 kilocalories a day, like some of these bodybuilders and elite athletes require, is counterintuitive to survival of that organism and even survival of the tribe and community, because now you need much more than the rest of them. So you take from the others. We see this really nice energy expenditure, male versus female comparison. So what you're looking at here is a diagram from Ponce's book. And what we can see is this is based on doubly labeled water, which is the highest quality measurement tool we can use to manage your energy expenditure. They're basically it's like an isotope in your body that they measure, and they can see how much heat or energy is being expended on an individual. And what we see is this really nice, the black line is the average. And what we see is that and let's go female for the begin with, as the female gets bigger, there is this not linear relationship, but this positive relationship that as mass becomes bigger, so does energy expenditure. So we can go a 50 kilo female or 110 pounds, and she's in the 50th percentile, which is average. She's sitting at around 2,000 kilocalories. Now, if let's jack it up, let's go 90 kilo female, or 200 pounds approximately. Now she needs upwards of 2,500 kilocalories. And of course, there is a confidence interval. Some women, some people will need more, some will need less. This is the 50th percentile. For example, if we go in the 90th percentile, we see for a 90 kilo female, we're nearly at around 3,000 kilocalories. Now, this is total mass. We're not stratifying this versus muscle mass versus fat mass. However, let's now go to males, who do have, on average, considerably more muscle mass and less fat mass. And we can see average male, 70 kilos. Okay, he's sitting somewhere around 2,600 kilocalories. Let's now compare him to a 100 kilo male, 220 pounds, and upwards of 3,000 kilocalories. And we can see there are still outliers here who require 35, even 4,000 kilocalories. And the more muscle mass this individual has, the more energy they tend to require. So we can see this positive relationship with body mass and caloric energy expenditure, thus caloric intake. And this total daily energy expenditure is mostly actually required just to keep the lights on, just for organ function. Organs also get bigger to an extent as you become more fitter, as you grow in size generally. But what mostly is happening is a hypertrophy of muscle tissue and fluid, etc. Well, there's no hypertrophy of fluid, but there's a putting on of fluid. There's more burden on the frame of the individual. So total daily energy expenditure is the summed up energy expenditure of your organs as they go about their background. Actually, excuse me, that's BMR I'm about to define. Just to keep the lights on. This is the majority of energy expenditure is coming from just keeping the lights on without doing nothing. Now, what we should know is muscle takes up about 40% of body weight, but only 16% of BMR, which is about 280 kilocalories per day, or 6 kilocalories per pound, or half a kilo, for the average adult. Now, if we compare this to fat, muscle is 3 times more metabolically active because fat only expends 2 kilocalories per day for the average 80 kilo adult at 30% body fat. So now we can start to say, what if now 70%, 80% of the organism, or rather, a much higher percentage of the organism, the mammal, the human, has muscle mass. Well, now we can start to see, okay, for every half kilo, we are increasing the kilocalorie requirement 3 times more than fat. And so this adds up over 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 kilos of mass, which a lot of guys and girls will end up putting on throughout their lifespan, whether it's predominantly fat or they're going through a muscle accrual phase and they want to get big, jacked, and strong, the rock style. And so you can start to see how your total daily energy expenditure will be different. If you're trying to put on 10, 20, 30 kilos, you can expect you will require considerably or measurably more food at a maintenance level once you get to that point to sustain your body mass. Therefore, metabolism is governed predominantly by the ratio of the total mass of the organism and then the ratio of muscle to fat. And to a small extent, the energy expenditure through things like exercise, NEAT, the thermic effect of food, to a much smaller extent. More mass, higher energy requirements. Less mass, lower requirements. Most people can explain their lower metabolism by, excluding thyroid issues and hypothyroidism. Excluding those exceptions, guys, there's a million of them, okay? Let's just talk about the average for a second. Most people can be explained by low body mass, low muscle mass, more caloric intake over the lifespan, a gaining of fat mass, thus slowing of metabolism and a lack of physical training, resistance training particularly. So if you like food, you love food, I love food, and you want to eat more or sustain the amount of food you want to eat, and you want to increase your metabolism quality of life at the same time, it would behoove you, I like that word, behoove, makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about. It would behoove you to lift weights consistently, at least 2 to 3 times a week, to put on more muscle mass and support a greater, higher energy expenditure and metabolism. Thanks, guys. I'm out. I'll see you in the next one.